Here to discuss this and much, much more with me is the head of crime and justice at the Policy Exchange, David Spencer. David, a very good morning to you.
Good morning, Mike. Good to see you.
Yeah, good to see you too. I mean, it's an interesting way to deal with the prison overcrowding system, isn't it? To just let people out early. I mean, call me old-fashioned, but surely the whole point of going to prison is that you serve the time that you were sentenced to serve. And if you haven't got enough space in prisons, you should build some more, shouldn't you?
Well, that's right. And that's a really big part of the problem, is that the government had planned to bring 20,000 new prison places online through the prison building programme by the mid-2020s. And certainly what we're seeing at the moment is that programme's well behind. I think the other big problem with, or the big challenge certainly, with people being released into the community early is where the probation service is at the moment. The probation service has been through 10 years of reform, reversal of the reforms, trying to rebuild it. The probation service is in real challenges at the moment. And so releasing people from prison into the care of the probation service is something that we need to keep an eye on very closely.
And what is it about the probation service that is lacking, if you like? I mean, will they complain that they haven't got enough people as well, that they can't keep tabs on all the people they're supposed to keep tabs on? How does that all work now?
Well, if we look at the probation service over the last 10 years, they went through a massive reform programme, which it quite clearly became pretty quickly was not working. They then had to reverse that. So they outsourced everything, then they insourced it again. They had to reverse the whole programme, and they've basically been going through a process of rebuilding the probation service over the last couple of years. So it's been through a pretty traumatic experience as an organisation over the last couple of years. One of the things that the government said they're going to do is double the number of people on electronic tags. The reality is, if we're going to see a lot more people released from prison, even doubling the number of people on tags isn't going to be enough. And so we're going to need to see that number massively increase.
Yeah. And I mean, how do they categorise prisoners that they decide to release? Because presumably you'd like to think that some of the more dangerous prisoners don't get released early. But of course, what we've discovered over time with regards to people like Colin Pitchfork was that he was released into an open prison long before there was even any conversations about whether he should actually be allowed out. And it turns out that he was walking around in towns and in various different locations with members of the public long before we even knew about it.
Yeah, I mean, they go through a fairly significant risk assessment process. The challenge is that as there is a significant increase in the number of people being released, the probation officers and other people in the criminal justice system need to do more of those risk assessments. And obviously, the more that you have to do, the more likelihood there is of things being missed. So, this is the criminal justice system as a whole is in a pretty parlous state. And certainly, while some of the steps the government is taking are absolutely necessary, particularly around things like foreign national offenders and deporting them and getting them out of our prisons, the challenge is pretty significant.
Yeah, I think so. And so what would you do if you were to try and improve on the system after the release of these prisoners? Because, I mean, obviously what we'd like to know is how many of these prisoners come out of prison and then never go back in. My fear is that the recidivism rates are actually pretty high, and that somebody who has been in prison once is more likely to return there than somebody who's never been.
Yes, there's a lot of data on this, and certainly people who have committed crimes and have been sentenced to short sentences, so that's a sentence of less than a year. When they come out of prison, about 55% of them reoffend within a year. People that have done community sentences, so therefore they've been convicted of a crime and they have to do unpaid work, or they get tagged in the community, they are on a curfew, those sorts of things, their recidivism rate is about 30% within a year. So you're talking about different types of prisoner, but the recidivism rates are pretty high, you're right.
That's the problem, isn't it? Let's talk about some of the other things going on around the justice system. I mean, there's a bizarre story today about a senior police officer who was the head of the drug squad who failed to take a drug test and kept refusing to take a drugs test. It took 3 years to get him out of the job, cost £1.5 million. His name's Julian Bennett. He's eventually now been sacked. He was accused, apparently, of smoking joints, taking ecstasy, taking LSD, all sorts of other things before he went into work. He denies it. He's been cleared of all of that. But why does it take the police this length of time to get rid of somebody? And why was he getting paid 400,000 quid in the 3 years it took to nobble him?
Well, do you know what my honest reaction is? I can't give you an explanation. It's absolutely incomprehensible. It's taken 3.5 years. The whole thing has cost about £1.5 million. It's absolutely incredible. The only positive things I can say two positive things about this. Well, probably three. First of all, the guy clearly committed gross misconduct and has been sacked by the police. That's the right thing to have happened. The second thing is very clearly the relatively new management inside the Met. The Assistant Commissioner for Standards and Professionalism, a woman called Barbara Gray, she gave a statement about this. She was clearly pretty disgusted by this officer's conduct. So that's the second thing. The third thing is there has been recently a review of the way police misconduct and dismissals cases are handled. And I think we will see a change going forward so that we don't have this sort of ludicrous situation being replicated again.
Yeah, absolutely right. And meanwhile, back on the streets of our cities, we've seen some very odd behaviour by the police. We've seen not only the police dealing with protesters in a very, what I would call softly manner, asking people to get off statues, saying, please don't do that again or else something bad will happen, without saying what the bad thing will be. We then see, both in Manchester and London, police taking posters down that have been put there by campaigners for the freeing of children who are being held hostage by Hamas, and the police are actually taking the posters down. Seems an incredible state of affairs that we find ourselves in.
You're right, and I can see that you're showing the footage from Liverpool Street the other night during rush hour, when there was a pretty significant protest.
Yes.
It's impossible for me to believe that there wasn't significant disruption to commuters being able to get home after a day's work with all of these people. And they just seem to have been allowed to get on with it. It is absolutely incredible. And the fact that that particular protest was done at Liverpool Street, which is where the Kinder Transport Memorial is, seems to me just particularly grotesque.
Yeah, exactly right. And it does seem, and I don't think we're being unkind to say this, that the police, certainly in London, are, if anything, pro people who are on the side of Palestine and anti-people who are not, because they also arrested a man this week in London, in East London, because of something that he said about Palestinians and about somebody who was found to be complaining about the number of Palestinian flags in his neighbourhood of East London, Bethnal Green.
I'm not familiar with that exact case, Mike. I wouldn't go as far as you have there in saying that the police are pro-Palestinian or anti sort of Jewish people. I don't think that's right. I think that what we're seeing is the police dealing with, I think we would all acknowledge, a very difficult situation. It is not easy, for example, in a crowd of 100,000 people to go and arrest 10, 20 people. The problem is that the current tactics are leading to this pretty perverse outcome where it appears to a lot of people, like you say, that there is something around a sort of differential policing going on. And certainly the work that Policy Exchange has been doing around protest, actually for many years, has looked at this sort of issue. And I can certainly see why people are very, very concerned about it.
Yeah, absolutely, because it does appear to be that way. It may be that I'm jumping to a conclusion, but it certainly appears to be that way, and it appears to a lot of people to be that way. And we've got another big protest coming up on Saturday. There's several posters that have appeared around various online forums calling for a March for Palestine in London on Saturday, the 11th of November. And included, rather ironically, on the poster says coaches from Dewsbury and Batley. Batley, of course, the place where a teacher has been in hiding ever since making a reference to Muhammad in a school classroom. So it really is quite a bizarre situation all round. But David, thank you very much indeed.